Hi, my name is Anise Barker, and I'd like to welcome you to part 2 in a series looking at the 3Rs curriculum, which is a comprehensive sexual education curriculum. Senate Bill 5395, which was signed into law on Friday, March 27th by Governor Jay Inslee, mandates all public schools in Washington state teach comprehensive sexual education, or CSE, to all students grades K through 12. This bill was requested by the Office of the Superintendent of Public Instruction, or OSPI. OSPI sets educational standards for curriculum in Washington. 5395 mandates that all schools teach an approved CSE curriculum that meets OSPI standards for comprehensive sexual education. What I would like to do next is walk through the only comprehensive sexual education curriculum currently approved by OSPI for K through 12. There are other currently approved curricula, but this is the only one that includes K through 3 lessons. The name of this curriculum is Rights, Respect, and Responsibility, or you may know it as the 3Rs. This curriculum was written by Advocates for Youth, an organization that openly embraces youth sexuality as normal and healthy. We are going to be looking at grades 6 through 8. Let's get started. As we move through the curriculum, you will see the school grade we are discussing, and next to that is the approximate age of the children in that grade. Each one of the blue bullet points is a lesson your child will receive. Sometimes that will be the actual title of the lesson, and sometimes I have just listed the topic of the lesson to make it clearer. Each lesson is roughly 50 minutes of instruction, with male and female students receiving instruction together. This is no longer your 1-hour lesson on a Friday at the end of the day. There are over 684 pages of instruction in this curriculum. Because of that, I am only able to show you a small portion of content. There is so much more that I encourage you to look at on your own. I will link to the full lesson plans in the comments below the video. I also don't summarize very often. The content that you see is directly pulled from the lesson. This curriculum is a mixed bag. There are some good lessons, but there are some really awful lessons. I will be providing examples of some things that I found concerning. In 6th grade, your child will receive lessons on physical, social, cognitive, and emotional changes in puberty, gender roles, gender expectations, boundaries, aggressive, passive, and assertive communication in regards to sexual relationships, understanding romantic relationships, how students can show love to someone now and when they're older, and how to find reliable information on the internet about sex. During the gender roles and gender expectations lesson, the teacher will ask, quote, "When a baby is born, what is the first question we tend to ask?" We look at their genitals. If we see a penis, people will say, "It's a boy." And if we see a vulva, people will say, "It's a girl." Students are asked to evaluate the different expectations put on each gender, male and female, and to see if they feel comfortable with those beliefs. The learning objectives of this lesson are 1. Name at least 2 characteristics that are stereotypically attached to boys, and 2 that are stereotypically attached to girls. 2. Describe their own feelings about behaviors being ascribed to a particular gender. The children are then asked how the described traits can apply to transgender or gender non-conforming people. They are also asked to fill in the blank. Quote, "If I were a blank, one thing I'd do that I can't do now is ... They are supposed to come up with 3 different things that they could do better if they were the opposite gender. They are asking your child to imagine themselves as the opposite gender. You can make your own inferences here regarding the intent of these type of questions, as well as the anticipated result. In the lesson on liking and loving, the class will discuss the different ways we can show others that we like them. The course of the conversation moves from friendships to romantic relationships. You can see listed the 3 learning objectives of this lesson. I have highlighted the second one. 1. List at least 3 non-sexual activities people can do to show others they like or love them. 2. Describe the 3 types of sexual intercourse, including whether or how they are related to human reproduction. And 3. Define abstinence and its connection to pregnancy prevention. The 3 types of sexual intercourse your child will learn about are vaginal, oral, and anal. The curriculum encourages the teacher to preface this part of the lesson with the following statement. Quote, "One behavior that people your age should wait to do together until they are older is sexual intercourse." After this statement, the lesson begins discussing the consequences of vaginal sexual intercourse as resulting in pregnancy. It also teaches that each of the 3 sexual intercourse methods can result in STDs. When the curriculum defines abstinence, it says, quote, "Abstinence doesn't mean you will never do that thing," end quote. Or abstinence is, quote, "when a person waits to do something until they are older or until some other time," end quote. Homework for this lesson is to take home a questionnaire that your child and you as a parent will fill out separately and then compare answers. One question included in this sheet is, "We talked today about some of the things that can happen as a result of having some kind of sexual intercourse with another person. Keeping that in mind, how does a person know when they're ready to have sex?" End quote. I would just like to point out that these children at ages 11 and 12 are well below the age of consent. In Washington state, 16 years old is the legal age of consent for sexual activity. So why are we posing the questions to our children at 11 and 12 years old? How does a person know when they're ready to have sex if they cannot even legally consent? In 6th grade, your child will be introduced to role play. This style of teaching will reoccur frequently. The students are given a written scenario and are paired up. They are either supposed to read through the scenario together to think about how they would react, or, at other times, they are given the role of one of the people in the scenario and must put themselves in the position of the character to work out how they would deal with the situation. In this lesson, your child will read the following scenario with a group and decide how to deal with the character's boundaries being crossed. Quote, "Max and Julia spend a lot of time together now that they're a couple. When they find some private time alone, they like to kiss a lot. Max really wants to do something more, and so the next time they're alone together, he tries to pull Julia's shirt up and reach for one of her breasts. She pulls it back down and says no, but keeps kissing Max. He tries again, and she says, 'Max, no.' Max remembers seeing in a movie that if you keep trying, sometimes the other person gives in. So he tries again. Julia pushes him off, stops kissing him, and says, 'I'm going home,' and leaves." A few minutes into the lesson, the class will come back together and the group with this scenario will read it to the class. A note in the lesson lets the teacher know that the groups can choose to read this scenario or act it out for the class. Now, I don't think that the kids will actually act out something so graphic, but having kids get up in front of their class to act out a sexual scene has no place in our schools. In the lesson, Understanding Romantic Relationships, your 6th grade child will be introduced to scenario teaching that involves characters given gender-neutral names, such as Olivia and Dylan. The lesson specifically states that this gives the teacher an opportunity to discuss same-sex relationships. In 6th grade, your child will receive a lesson on, quote, "being a sex ed sleuth." The students in the class are sent to these 4 websites that have been made available by the IT department of the school to see if they can tell if they have reliable information about sex ed. By the end of the lesson and their research, the students are then given a handout with websites that the curriculum deems reliable. Interestingly, one of the criteria to identify whether or not a site has reliable sex ed information is it must contain no religious affiliation. These are the websites that your children will be sent to receive reliable information on sex education. Here are 2 screenshots of sexedcetera.org. Your child will be able to receive information on abortion as an option. Abortion is a safe and legal option when it comes to an unplanned pregnancy. And all about condoms. Condoms, how to choose the right one for you, where to get them, and how to properly store and use one. This is a screenshot of the homepage of stayteen.org. It includes information about birth control. and how to know when you're ready for sex, which shows a picture of a same-sex couple. In 7th grade, your child will receive lessons on anatomy, including 2 lessons, one 50-minute lesson for female and one 50-minute lesson for male. Reproduction basics, signs and symptoms of pregnancy, STDs, sexual identity and gender identity, gender norms, how to make choices, how to find reliable information on the internet about sex, aggressive, passive, and assertive communication in regards to sexual relationships, making changes in the world, LGBT advocacy, and online safety. In 7th grade, your child will be introduced to sex myths about preventing pregnancy. For their homework, they will watch a video of a much older teenage couple engaging in conversation in different situations about how they could have sex without getting pregnant, such as maybe we should jump up and down, or maybe we should do it in a swimming pool. Abortion is also introduced. The teacher says, quote, "Once a person confirms they are pregnant, they need to decide whether they are going to have the baby and become a parent, have the baby and let someone adopt it, or end the pregnancy at its earliest stage. The second 2 options are available for a number of reasons, including that the pregnant person may not feel they would be able to take care of a baby because of their age or life circumstances." Quote, "If a person chooses to carry the pregnancy for all 9 months." In 7th grade, your 12 and 13-year-old child will receive their first STD lesson. They will discuss what HIV and STDs are. They will then be broken up in groups and given a sheet of clues about a specific STD. They will go around the classroom looking at characteristics of particular STDs that the teacher has posted on the walls. The goal is to narrow down their clues to match their assigned STD. Something to note: even though they are looking for clues about their assigned STD, such as chlamydia, they are not actually told anything about the disease itself. The clues they are looking at only relate to how the disease is transmitted from one person to another, or if there is a treatment. Never once in the entire curriculum does it ever teach about the disease itself, the symptoms, or the health consequences of having the disease. All STD lessons in the 3 R's curriculum are about condom use and testing. They are not about the STDs. After the kids have identified their assigned STD, the class will talk about sexual behaviors and the risks they carry for contracting an STD. They will arrange a random assortment of behaviors as a class into the following 3 columns: high risk, low risk, and no risk. Low-risk behaviors can include both oral and anal sex, as long as a condom is used. The no-risk column lists behaviors that your children can participate in with no risk for contracting an STD. The above paragraph explains more about these behaviors for your child. Quote, "The activities here are more related to intimacy, with the exception of masturbation and mutual masturbation. These behaviors are important because they can help people learn about their bodies and build connections between people without any risk of STDs or pregnancy. These activities can include bathing together and solo and mutual masturbation." In 7th grade, your child will receive a lesson on gender and gender identity. Myths versus facts about gender identity are discussed. You will see an example in the upper corner. Quote, "A person's gender identity is what they call themselves, male, female, transgender, etc." End quote. Quote, "It doesn't matter what other people call them, how they feel on the inside is what's most important." End quote. End quote. "We don't choose our feelings, just like we don't choose who we find attractive. What we can choose is whether to act on those feelings, as well as what we call ourselves based on those feelings, our gender identity." End quote. For homework, your child will be sent to the following link to watch a video about LGBT and bullying. Your child will receive another gender lesson titled "Blue is for Boys, Pink is for Girls," or are they? Here your child will discuss with their class the gender norms that families push on their children. The 3 learning objectives for this lesson are: 1. Name at least 2 stereotypes associated with why many people value the gender binary of boys and girls. 2. Analyze at least 2 sources of gendered messages and expectations that exist within their culture. And 3. Describe at least one connection between gender expectations and discomfort around non-heterosexual orientations. During the lesson, the teacher will show the students pictures of stereotypical boy and girl activities. Then they show slides of boys doing girl things and girls doing boy things. The students are asked if that makes them uncomfortable and why. Quote, allow the students some time to wrestle with these concepts, both among themselves and with you. Say, quote, we've been talking during class about messages boys and girls get, but as many of you know, there are also people who don't identify as boys or girls, but rather as transgender or genderqueer. This means that even if they are called a boy or girl at birth, they may have body parts that are typically associated with being a boy or girl on the inside, but feel differently. Think for a moment about the experience of hearing these gendered messages and feeling like you were a different gender. If you felt on the inside like you were a girl, but everyone perceived you as a boy and pushed you to be really masculine, or if you felt on the inside that you were a boy and people pushed you to be more feminine, what do you think that would be like? End quote. You will notice the teacher uses language such as, quote, if they were called a boy or girl at birth and may have body parts that are typically associated with being a boy or girl. In this curriculum and throughout comprehensive sexuality education, gender at birth is referred to as, quote, assigned gender, end quote. The doctor assigns you a gender when you were born, or in this case, you were just, quote, called a boy or girl, end quote. In the 7th grade lesson titled, Let's Talk About Sex, your child will get to practice using his or her communication skills in regards to several different sexual situations they might imagine themselves being involved in. The teacher will say, quote, I am going to give each group a sheet that has a statement made by a person to their boyfriend or girlfriend that has something to do with sex or sexuality. This person's name is Partner A. You are Partner B. Your job is to respond to Partner A in an assertive way. Partner B wants to stay in a relationship with Partner A, end quote. The class then works through the scenario and responds as Partner B. Then they will pass their sheet to the next group. The teacher will continue by saying, quote, now that you've been Partner B, you're going to become Partner A. Read through the original type line and what the group before you came up with as an assertive response. Then, as a group, come up with a new line for Partner A. Keep in mind that Partner A may really want to have sex or is strongly considering it. They will continue this exercise for several rounds. At the end, they will read the exchanges aloud, role-playing them in front of the class. If two people of the same sex come to the front of the room to read a scenario, the class can then discuss that these scenarios can apply to same-sex couples and can be acted out as such. Listed here are the starting statements for each of the role-play scenarios. Quote, I saw Sam and Kayla earlier. They said they've decided to have sex after all. I know you and I said we'd wait, but what if they're doing it? Wouldn't it be okay for us too? End quote. Or, why don't we just have oral sex? You can't get STDs from it. End quote. It's our first time having sex. We don't need to use condoms or birth control. End quote. Well, if you're not willing to do it with me, then I'll just go find someone else who will. And, quote, if I don't want to use condoms when we have sex, it's like you're saying I'm dirty or something. End quote. For the homework assignment related to changing your schools to be more LGBT inclusive, your child is to pick one of the 3 videos about discrimination to view and then answer some questions. I have listed 2 of the 3 options here. The first video is about a middle school girl who sues her school district because they don't want to have a gay-straight alliance. They are advocating for students to sue their school districts over LGBT issues. The other is about a female transgender student who wants to use the boys' restroom at school. In 8th grade, your child will receive lessons on creating a safe school, celebrating all, outside influences, healthy or unhealthy relationships, verbal communication, communication and listening in a sexual relationship, clear text communication, sexual abuse and assault, birth control, using condoms effectively, and STDs. In 8th grade, your child will be participating in another lesson which asks students to look at their school environment to see if it is inclusive enough of LGBT students. Quote, "Today we are going to be talking about sexual orientation and gender identity and our school environment to see how well we make school feel like a welcome place for people of all orientations and genders. We'll also look at where to see room for improvement and how we would propose making some changes." During this lesson, the class can plan a project to help create more LGBT inclusivity. The project can be kept as a one-day classroom assignment or can be made into a school-wide project if the principal allows it. Will your child be able to opt out of a school-wide LGBT project? For homework, your child is sent to sexedetc.org to watch a video about being an ally for inclusion of the LGBT community. In 8th grade, your child will get to participate in more sexual situational role play. This time, they will be grouped into threes. 2 people will get to act out the scenario, and the third person is the judge to see if they worked through the scenario correctly. Person 1. You and person 2 have talked about it and think you're ready to have sex for the first time. Neither of you has ever had sex before. I mean, you've done other stuff with people, but not sex. Do you need to speak with person 2 about safer sex, or are you good? How do you do that? Person 2. You and person 1 have talked about it and think you're ready to have sex for the first time. You haven't really had intercourse before. I mean, there was that one time when you got pretty close to it, but that doesn't really count, does it? Do you need to speak with person 2 about safer sex, or are you good? How do you do that? Here is another example of sexual situational role play in the same lesson. Person 1. You have every intention of staying abstinent until you are older. That doesn't mean, however, that you're against showing affection in other ways that don't carry a risk for STIs or pregnancy. Person 2 is the person you've been seeing and who wants to start having sex with you. How can you let them know you want to stay in the relationship but stick with your decision to wait to have sex? Person 2. You have never had sex before, but you've dated and kissed and made out with people. You really like person 1 and have been spending a lot of time together. You feel like if there's anyone you could have sex with, it's them, but they seem to want to wait. Can you see whether you might be able to get them to change their mind? This is about consent. This is an example of comprehensive sexual education curriculum, teaching about and having your child negotiate for sex through scenario role play. Your child is being taught about affirmative consent, even though they cannot legally consent to sex. I couldn't believe my eyes when I read this scenario. They are teaching your child how to talk another child who wants to remain abstinent into having sex with them. In the lesson about healthy and unhealthy relationships, your child will study different types of relationships to look for an imbalance of power. They are given the following scenarios to examine. 1. A girl has a girlfriend who is 10 years older than she is. Her older girlfriend has a job, a car, and a place to live where they can be alone together. When they go out, the older partner always pays. 2. A guy and a girl have been together for 6 months and are having sex. Whenever the guy does something the girl doesn't like, she tells him that she won't have sex with him until he does something nice for her. 3. A guy has been with his boyfriend for 5 months. They've said I love you to each other, but when they're around other friends at school, one guy pretends they're not a couple. He says it's because he hasn't yet told his family that he's gay. Following the examples, the teacher will talk about a potential of power imbalance in the scenarios. Quote, ask, in which of these relationships do you feel like one person has more power than the other person? Point to the example of a girl who has a girlfriend who is 10 years older than she is and ask, quote, in what ways could the older girlfriend have more power than the younger one? End quote. And then they're instructed to write a P on that card to indicate that there is a potential for one partner to have more power than the other. The first example they discuss is a statutory relationship. Every time kids are given relationship examples and scenarios, they are supposed to imagine themselves as part of these relationships. A 13 and 14-year-old will be imagining a relationship with a 23 or 24-year-old adult. In the conclusion, they indicate that there is a potential for one person in that relationship to have more power than the other. This is a predatory relationship. There is nothing normal or possibly okay with this example. Through this kind of teaching, they are normalizing statutory relationships as long as there's consent. Again, these kids cannot consent to sex at all. They're only 13 and 14 years old. In Washington State, the legal age of consent is 16. And not only does the curriculum have them imagine themselves in situations where they are making hypothetical decisions to engage in sexual activity, but they are normalizing illegal, predatory behavior. Your 8th grade child will receive a lesson on birth control. The premise of this lesson is to help your child plan for when they want to have their own children. The teacher draws the timeline that you see above on the board, and the teacher prompts, quote, "The stick figure wants to have children someday, but not anytime soon. They are trying to decide if they should have vaginal sex or not. Let's imagine that they wait until they are older, maybe 16, before they have vaginal sex." End quote. Abstinence is defined as, quote, "This means a penis not going inside another person's vagina," end quote. And students are told that, quote, "Abstaining from vaginal sex is the only 100% effective way to prevent pregnancy when done consistently and correctly. In fact, it is the method used by most 8th graders," end quote. The teacher then goes over 7 different methods of birth control, including external condoms, pills, patch and ring, abstinence, IUDs, shots and implants, withdrawal, emergency contraception, and dual use. Withdrawal is given as a safe and low-risk option for birth control. Quote, "Withdrawal, often called pulling out, is when a penis is removed from a vagina before sperm are ejaculated to prevent pregnancy, and while it is not as effective as some other methods, it is definitely better than not using anything. It is not, however, the same thing as abstinence." End quote. Plan B is also taught as a normal form of birth control. It is important to note that teachers are encouraged to have a positive conversation with their students about birth control. They are not supposed to teach about the side effects of each method or the failure rates. If a student wants that information, they are instructed to speak with a medical professional. An example of this is the withdrawal method. They use language like, quote, "not as effective as some other methods." But what they aren't saying is that the withdrawal method has a 22% failure rate. And in other curriculum, it even states that, quote, "it takes a lot of self-control and practice to use the withdrawal method effectively," end quote. I don't know any teen that has a lot of self-control and sexual practice, so why are they recommending this method? And then there is Plan B. They introduce it to kids as a reliable method of birth control, when in fact, it only works if you have not already ovulated. All that Plan B does is stop ovulation. If they are going to teach birth control, why are they not sharing all the information about these methods? Your 8th grader will have another birth control lesson, this time focusing on condom use and STD testing. Condom use is discussed and may be demonstrated by the teacher. The teacher may also demonstrate the use of a female condom on a pelvic model. Students are also asked to research clinics on where to receive free STD testing, and they get to evaluate each other's plans to avoid STDs. For homework, they get to read an article titled, "Taking Charge of My Sexual Health with STD Testing and Communication." End quote. This is a paper promoting Planned Parenthood as a great source for STD information and testing. Thank you for joining me for a look at content from the 3R's curriculum. More videos in this series, including content for grades K through 5 and 9 through 12, can be found on our YouTube channel, A Voice for Washington Children, or on our website, the number 4wachildren.org. 6th-8th.org. You can also join us in the fight against Senate Bill 5395 and comprehensive sexual education by joining the group Against 5395 on Facebook.